He was a single father who just wanted to help a woman in the rain, but he didn't know who she was or what she was hiding. Their encounter changed everything. What shocking secret was she carrying that turned his life upside down? Watch until the end and write in the comments which country you're from. Don't forget to subscribe to the Real Stories Diary channel. Rain fell in heavy sheets against the windshield. The old wipers of Tom Bennett's Dodge Ram, groaning with each pass, smearing water more than clearing it. The sky over the Oregon hills had turned to cold steel, and the early morning light barely cut through the low-hanging clouds. He drove slowly, his hands firm on the wheel, calloused fingers twitching as he maneuvered around puddles and broken asphalt. The truck's heater rattled, doing little against the dampness that had crept into the cab. Tom didn't mind. He liked the solitude of the road, the honesty of hard weather. It gave him something solid to push against. His mind was already turning over the day ahead, pouring concrete, checking rebar placement, and making sure none of the new hires cut corners. The job site, like the town itself, was worn, but stubborn. He appreciated that in a place. Nothing came easy in Milltown. Everything had to be earned. Up ahead, barely visible through the rain, a figure appeared at the side of the road. As the Dodge drew closer, Tom saw a woman standing under a battered bus stop sign, her thin coat soaked, a pair of hospital scrubs clinging to her legs. She wasn't trying to shield herself from the rain. Her arms were wrapped around a manila folder held tight to her chest. Her head was bowed, not in search of cover, but as if the sky itself had turned too heavy to look up at. Tom slowed, pulled to the side, and let the engine idle. For a moment, he just watched her. Her posture struck him, rigid, but not defeated, worn down, maybe, but not crumpled. There was something familiar in it, something that reminded him of old pine boards bent by age, but refusing to snap. He looked at the clock on the dash. 6:41 a.m., he needed to be on site in 20 minutes, but his foot hovered over the gas pedal, unwilling to press down. With a sigh, he reached across and rolled the passenger window down. The cold air rushed in with the sound of rain. "You need a ride," he called out, voice gravelly with sleep and years of disuse. The woman turned slowly. Her face was tired, hair plastered to her cheeks. She didn't answer right away, just stared at him with eyes the color of old coffee, dark, alert, and too familiar with disappointment. For a moment he expected her to decline, but then she nodded once and stepped forward. Her steps were careful, as though her legs might give out if she moved too fast. She opened the door, climbed in, and shut it with a wet thunk. "Thanks," she murmured, her voice barely above the rain. Tom nodded, but didn't speak. He turned the heat up and eased the truck back onto the road. They drove in silence. Her wet clothes smelled faintly of antiseptic and mildew. The heater made slow progress against the fog clinging to the windows. He glanced at her out of the corner of his eye. She was older than he'd first guessed, maybe mid-30s, but her exhaustion made her look older. Her knuckles were white around the folder she held, and her shoulders curled inward as if trying to disappear. "You a nurse?" he asked after a mile or so, nodding toward her scrubs. "Was," she replied simply. Tom didn't push. If she wanted to explain, she would. He respected that kind of silence. It had a weight he understood. Instead, he focused on the road. The engine's hum, the rain's rhythm. She didn't ask where they were going, and he didn't offer. A few blocks later, he slowed in front of the Blue Ridge Motel, a squat L-shaped building with faded siding and a flickering neon sign that buzzed even in daylight. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. "I'm just staying here for now," she said quietly. He pulled into the gravel lot and shifted into park. She opened the door and stepped out into the drizzle. Her baggy shoes splashed in a puddle. "Thank you," she said again, pausing by the open door. Tom nodded. "Take care." She closed the door gently and turned toward the office. He watched until she disappeared under the overhang, then drove off, windshield wipers back to their endless complaining. The rest of the day passed in a blur of cement, shouting over drills and double-checking blueprints, but she stayed in the back of his mind. Something about her stillness, the quiet way she sat, not asking, not explaining. He had a good sense for people. Decades on job sites taught him who was steady and who'd bail when things got rough. She was the steady kind. That night, after checking on Danny and reheating leftover chili, Tom settled into his recliner with a book he wouldn't finish. Rain still tapped against the windows. His thoughts wandered back to the woman. He realized he hadn't even asked her name. In the motel room, Kiara sat on the edge of a lumpy mattress. She peeled off her wet clothes and dried her hair with a scratchy towel. The heater in the wall clicked and coughed, but gave no warmth. She opened her folder. Inside were printouts, emails, letters, HR reports, her nursing license, and the final termination notice. It still stung the way they'd hidden behind bureaucracy and vague terms like misalignment with institutional values. She had spoken up. That was her sin. Patients in need cut off for the sake of profit. Her voice had been labeled disruptive. The people she trusted had gone silent. She set the folder aside and lay back, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow she would try again. Another clinic, another low-paying job, another chance at being useful. Anything to avoid fading into irrelevance. But as she drifted off, she remembered the man in the truck. No questions, no judgment, just an offer of warmth in a cold place. Could this chance encounter lead to a partnership that changes their lives forever? The next morning, the sky was clearer, though puddles still dotted the streets. Tom stood by his truck with a coffee thermos, watching steam curl from the lid. Danny had gone to his physical therapy appointment. The job site was in motion without him for a few hours. He should have been reviewing invoices, but instead he found himself turning the key in the ignition and pulling out of the driveway. He wasn't sure where he was going until he got there. The Blue Ridge Motel looked no different than yesterday. A few guests milled about smoking or hauling bags into dented sedans. Tom parked, got out, and walked to the front desk. The clerk looked up from his phone. "You got a woman in scrubs staying here? Tall, dark skin, real quiet?" The clerk eyed him. "Room 12. Tom hesitated, then knocked on the faded blue door. For a second, he considered leaving. Then it opened. Kiara stood there, her face unreadable. "I've got a job site," he said simply. "Always someone getting hurt, pulling a muscle, slicing something open. No one official, just a ragtag first aid kit and a bunch of guys too proud to see a doctor. Figured maybe you'd want to take a look." She blinked. "You offering me a job?" He scratched the back of his neck. "I'm offering you a truck ride and a chance to feel useful. Can't pay much. Hell, can't really pay at all. But the guys might buy you lunch." Kiara looked past him at the lot at the pickup truck idling by the curb. She stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind her. "I'll come for today." He nodded. "Let's go." And with that, they got into the truck again. Not as strangers this time, but as two people walking toward the edge of something unknown. The road ahead was uneven, but it was a beginning. Rain began again, softer this time, almost like a memory. Kiara had learned long ago to measure her life in small increments. A shift, a patient, a chart, one decision, then the next. But lately, the decisions had stopped being hers to make. Now they were made by others behind closed doors and polished desks, handed to her in cold envelopes and muted phone calls. The morning after she accepted Tom's offer, she stood in the tiny motel bathroom, staring at herself in the spotted mirror above a sink with a slow-dripping faucet. The fluorescent light hummed overhead, harsh and unforgiving, revealing the dark circles under her eyes, the roughness of her palms. Her scrubs, still damp from where she had laid them over the heater, clung to her body and wrinkled. She had once worn a crisp white coat, her name stitched neatly over the heart. Dr. Kiara James RN MSN. Now she had a badge from a free clinic she'd volunteered at last month, peeling at the edges and hastily scribbled in marker. The ride with Tom had been quiet but not uncomfortable. She appreciated the silence, the lack of questions. It had felt like stepping into warmth after months in a storm. She didn't know what to expect at the construction site, but something about the offer, the simplicity of it, felt real. Honest. She would take honesty over polished deception any day. Her mind drifted as she brushed her hair back into a bun. She remembered the last day she'd worn that white coat. Boston 6 months ago. The hallways of the hospital gleamed. Children's laughter echoed faintly behind the doors of the pediatric unit. She had always loved that floor, full of life, hope, and resilience. But the charts in her hands that day didn't bring hope. They brought confusion. Medications changed overnight. Prescriptions rewritten. Children with chronic conditions suddenly responding poorly to new treatments. At first, she thought it was a clerical error. Then, a pattern emerged. She documented everything page by page. What she saw couldn't be ignored. She remembered the meeting room, sterile and cold with its long polished table and executives in suits who never once stepped onto her ward. They used terms like efficiency protocols and cost realignment, pretending it didn't affect real children. She asked questions, too many. The next day, she was reassigned, then suspended, then terminated. She didn't cry when she read the letter, but she cried when the children's mothers called, asking why Nurse Kiara wasn't there. She cried when she saw her colleagues avert their eyes in the hallway. She cried when she packed her apartment into boxes and realized no one would help her carry them. Her fiancé, a neurosurgeon with a glittering future, said she was making a scene, that she should have just kept her head down. The engagement ended with a phone call and the words, "I can't afford to be dragged down with you." So she left Boston, sold the last of her furniture, used the settlement money, what little was left after legal fees, to drive west. Portland was far enough away to start over, or at least try. Now she stood on the edge of another beginning, not in a hospital, but on a construction site, surrounded by men in steel-toe boots and high-vis vests. Tom met her in the parking lot with a nod. He had a clean thermos in his hand and an extra pair of gloves tucked into his belt. "They're rough around the edges," he said as they walked across the gravel toward the trailer that served as the site office, "but not bad guys, just not used to anyone new, let alone someone like you." She didn't need clarification. Someone like me could mean a woman or a black woman or a nurse or all three. She was used to it. Inside the trailer, the air smelled like stale coffee and motor oil. A folding table held a disorganized collection of bandages, ibuprofen, tape, and a dusty first aid manual. It wasn't a clinic, but it was a start. Kiara set to work immediately. She cleaned the space, inventoried the supplies, and organized them into labeled bins. Tom brought her a metal stool and fixed the broken window latch. They worked side by side in silence until the first injury arrived. A man in his late 20s stumbled in holding his hand in a rag. "Damn nail gun," he muttered. Blood seeped through the cloth. Kiara didn't flinch. She motioned for him to sit, washed her hands, and peeled back the rag with practiced calm. The wound wasn't deep, but it would need cleaning and proper dressing. She moved efficiently, asking questions about tetanus shots and allergies, all while the man stared at her with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. "You a real nurse?" he asked finally. "I was," she answered. "Still am if you ask the people I help." He nodded slowly. "Guess that's what matters." Word spread quickly. By lunch, 3 more workers had come by for help. A pulled shoulder, a twisted ankle, and someone with heat exhaustion from working near the generator. Each time Kiara worked with quiet precision. She didn't ask questions beyond what was needed. She didn't expect gratitude, but it came anyway in gruff nods and half-mumbled thank yous. Not everyone was pleased. One of the younger guys, all muscle and attitude, muttered something under his breath about charity cases and affirmative action nurses. Kiara didn't respond, but Tom did, not with words, but by standing next to her and handing her the gauze she needed, making it clear where he stood. Later, while cleaning up, Kiara found herself alone in the trailer. She sat on the stool and looked around at the shelves she'd organized. It was the smallest medical space she'd ever worked in, but it felt more meaningful than any corner office or hospital suite. She was needed here, not tolerated, not managed, needed. That evening, Tom invited her to join him and Danny for dinner. She hesitated, but hunger and exhaustion won. The house was modest, clean, filled with the scent of something slow-cooked and savory. Danny greeted her with a wide grin and an outstretched hand. "About time someone showed my brother how to run a real operation," he said. Kiara laughed genuinely. The table was cluttered with tools, drawings, and leftover takeout containers. Tom apologized, but she waved it off. "This feels like life," she said softly. "Not decor, life." After dinner, they sat in the small living room. Danny fell asleep on the couch with a blanket pulled up to his chin. Tom handed her a mug of tea. "Why do you really come to Portland?" he asked. Kiara looked down at the steam rising from the cup. She thought of lying, of giving a simple answer, but something in his voice, steady, unpressing, made her speak the truth. "I tried to fix something, and they broke me for it." Tom didn't ask what. He didn't need to. Instead, he said, "Well, seems like you're putting things back together." She smiled, trying. They sat there in silence. Two people with different wounds but similar scars. The rain tapping gently on the windows once more. Outside, the world moved on, unaware that in a small town and a smaller trailer, someone who had been cast aside was starting to find her place again. And maybe, just maybe, Tom thought, so was he. The air smelled of wet concrete and wood dust, of steel and sun, and something else beneath it. Something raw, like mistrust hanging thick between the planks. Kiara stepped out of Tom's truck just past 6 the next morning, her bag slung over her shoulder and her posture already braced for the day. She wore a clean set of navy scrubs and sturdy shoes, but no one at the construction site looked at her uniform. They looked at her face, at her skin, and then looked away. Tom had warned her it would be like this. "They're good guys once they trust you," he had said the night before over cold leftovers and warm silence. She didn't expect warmth. She didn't need it. She needed purpose, and for now, this was the only place that offered her that without first asking her to apologize for existing. The men on the site moved around her like she was part of the scaffolding, seen but not spoken to. A few nodded. Most didn't. She walked past them, chin high, until she reached the trailer. Inside, the small space she had organized the previous day still held its order. Bandages lined up neatly in labeled boxes. Painkillers stacked in measured rows. The folding chair in the corner bore the faint imprint of her presence. It wasn't a clinic, but it was hers. By mid-morning, the sun was high and tempers short. A shout from the southern edge of the site drew her outside. A man, stocky, red-faced, clutching his hand, stumbled towards the trailer, cursing a nail gun that had misfired. Blood dripped from his fingers onto the ground. Without waiting for permission, Kiara led him inside, sat him down, and began cleaning the wound. She worked efficiently, asking about allergies and vaccines, all while the man watched her like he didn't know what to make of her. When she finished, he flexed his hand, stared at the bandage, and nodded. "Didn't think you'd know what you were doing," he said. Kiara didn't flinch. "Now you know." He left without another word. The next few days followed a rhythm both predictable and unspoken. Men came in with twisted ankles, sunburns, back spasms. Kiara treated them all without comment. She never demanded gratitude, and rarely did they offer it. But the silence around her began to shift from dismissal to curiosity, from suspicion to something softer, if not quite respect. Still, not everyone was willing to adjust. It started with muttering, the kind of low-slung words that buzzed just under the surface. Affirmative action, diversity hire, medical hobbyist. She heard them all, delivered with the false innocence of someone pretending they were just joking. One young man, Ryan, barely out of his teens, with more biceps than sense, smirked as he passed her one morning and said loudly, "Hope you don't kill anyone with that fake nursing degree." Tom was nearby, inspecting insulation. He didn't look up, but his voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Get back to work, Ryan, or pack your damn tools." Ryan rolled his eyes, but he shut his mouth. That night, Tom lingered by the trailer as Kiara packed up. She didn't say anything about the comment, and he didn't apologize on Ryan's behalf. Instead, he handed her a bottle of water and said, "Most of them just don't know any better." Kiara took the bottle, twisting the cap slowly. "It's not about knowing better. It's about choosing better." Tom looked away. "They'll come around. Some don't." There was no heat in her voice, just truth. On Friday afternoon, a storm moved in quickly, turning the sky a murky gray. The first raindrops fell as Kiara cleaned a deep scrape on one of the electrician's arms. She was nearly finished when a familiar voice startled her. "Whoa," Danny said, standing in the doorway with his walker and a grin that took up half his face. "This place looks more legit than the ER I went to last year." Kiara smiled despite herself. "If you're here for attention, I'm all out of lollipops." Danny cackled and leaned against the doorframe. "Nah, just here to make sure my brother hasn't turned this site into a death trap." Tom appeared behind him with an umbrella. "He snuck out of the truck while I was on the phone." "I roll with purpose," Danny said, then turned to Kiara. "You're a good one. You can tell by how the grumps around here don't know how to act around you." Kiara chuckled, finishing her dressing and sending her patient off with a nod. "You want to sit?" she asked Danny. "Only if you've got tea and gossip." She did in fact have tea. And within minutes Danny was sipping it and regaling her with stories about Tom. Childhood antics, past mistakes, and a surprising amount of affection layered in the teasing. "He acts like a brick wall, but he's got good eyes," Danny said. "Knows when someone needs a hand, even if he pretends he doesn't." Kiara listened with quiet amusement. She hadn't laughed this much in months. Maybe longer. When the storm intensified, Tom offered to drive her back to the motel. She accepted, exhausted. The cab was warm, the rain drumming gently on the roof as they drove. "Danny likes you," Tom said, not looking at her. "I like him." They didn't speak for a while. After that, the silence between them was different now. Not awkward, but familiar, like an old song you remember without needing the words. At the motel, she hesitated before opening the door. "Thanks," she said, "for everything." Tom gave a short nod. "See you Monday." She watched him drive away, his brake lights glowing red in the rain, and wondered if maybe, just maybe, this was a place she could belong. The following week brought a new rhythm. Tom brought her coffee most mornings, black, no sugar, just how she liked it. Danny visited the trailer every Friday with homemade sandwiches and unsolicited advice. The men on the crew began to nod when they passed her. Some even stopped to talk. One afternoon, Kiara overheard two of them arguing about whether she'd stitched a wound cleaner than the local urgent care. The answer, evidently, was yes. It wasn't everything. It wasn't justice, but it was something, a start. On Wednesday, Tom walked her to her truck after the shift ended. She had borrowed an old SUV from the motel's handyman, its engine wheezing like a sick dog. Tom looked at it skeptically. "You sure this thing runs?" "Usually," she said. He hesitated, then without looking at her said, "If you ever want to do more than just patch them up, I've got some ideas." Kiara raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "Don't know yet, but you're not meant to stay in this trailer forever." She didn't say anything, but the next morning, she brought a stethoscope and a box of new supplies she'd scraped together from a local discount vendor. That Friday, Ryan, who had once muttered under his breath, walked in with a swollen ankle and didn't make eye contact. Kiara examined the joint, wrapped it, and gave him ice. As he limped to the door, he mumbled, "Thanks." She just nodded. Later, she added a note to her ledger. Third week, still standing. By the end of the month, the trailer had a name painted by Danny in crooked letters, Field Medic, authorized by boss's orders. Kiara laughed when she saw it, but left it up. Sometimes healing started with the smallest acknowledgments, a nod, a sandwich, a name on a trailer. She was still a stranger here, but no longer among strangers. And that, in its own quiet way, was enough. By the time April leaned into its second half, the site had begun to breathe with something close to rhythm. The days felt less jagged, the pauses less strained. Even the rain, that ever-present veil over Portland's mornings, had softened into a familiar backdrop, more companion than nuisance. For Kiara, the trailer had become more than a workspace. It was a sanctuary carved out of dust and doubt. The men, though not all affectionate or outspoken, had come to recognize her quiet authority, if not always by words, then by the way they stepped inside her makeshift clinic with less hesitation. Tom, for his part, maintained his pattern of silence and small gestures. He didn't praise her, didn't call meetings, or draw attention to the difference she was making. But when the generator failed one morning and the breakroom coffee machine shut down, it was Kiara who received a warm thermos from his truck while the others muttered about caffeine withdrawal. That, in her book, meant more than applause. The change was gradual but undeniable, and it was exactly that slow progress, that barely formed sense of stability that made what followed hit so hard. It began on a Thursday just after lunch when a white SUV rolled onto the lot. It wasn't a truck like the rest. It had tinted windows, spotless paint, and government plates. The site manager, a lanky man with a clipboard glued to his hand and a permanent twitch in his eye, came sprinting toward the trailer like a man trying to put out a fire with bare hands. "You need to get out of here," he hissed as he ducked inside, looking at Kiara like she'd brought a bomb in her pocket. "Now." She stood from her stool, confused. "Excuse me. Corporate's here. Someone must have tipped them off. They're inspecting. Medical presence isn't authorized. This is a liability issue." Tom appeared in the doorway a moment later, his jaw already tight. He glanced at Kiara, then at the manager. "She's staying." "You can't say that." The manager snapped. "You're not the one writing the insurance checks. This isn't an approved medical facility. She's patched up half the crew since February. Without her, we'd have more injuries and more downtime. You know it. Don't pretend you don't." The man flinched but held his ground. "This isn't about what's fair. It's about what's allowed. If they see her in here, we could lose the contract. I could lose my job." Kiara felt the old familiar pressure start to build in her chest. The slow, suffocating squeeze of being tolerated until inconvenient. She had seen this before. The way support evaporated the second risk was introduced. She began gathering her things calmly, methodically. A bottle of antiseptic, a roll of gauze, her notebook. "I'll go," she said. Tom stepped in front of her. "You're not going anywhere." "Tom," she said quietly. "I've been here before. I know how this plays out. This isn't Boston." "No," she agreed. "But some things don't change." He looked at her at the steel in her eyes and realized she wasn't angry. She was tired, bone-deep, history-heavy tired, and he hated that he couldn't argue with that. The rest of the afternoon passed in a fog of tension. The inspectors walked the site, took notes, asked pointed questions. Kiara stayed out of sight, her supplies packed into 2 bags beside her, one hand resting protectively on them, as if the weight of her worth were bundled inside. When the SUV finally drove off, kicking up gravel behind it, Tom stood motionless for a long moment, staring after it. Then he walked back to the trailer and found her sitting alone. "I'm not letting them do this," he said. "You don't have a choice. I can quit." Kiara blinked. I don't want to work for people who'd rather let a man bleed out than let you clean the wound." She stared at him, stunned. "Don't make decisions you'll regret," she said, her voice low. "I won't. I already decided." And he did. The next morning, Tom didn't show up at the site. Neither did Danny. By noon, word had spread. Tom Bennett had walked, just quit, packed up his tools, and left without a backward glance. He didn't call Kiara until the evening. She answered on the first ring. "You free?" "Depends. I have an idea." When she arrived at his house, the truck was backed into the driveway, tailgate down. A heap of equipment sat in the bed, first aid kits, blankets, plastic crates, folding chairs. It looked like a disaster or a blueprint. "I was thinking," Tom said as she approached, "we could take this mobile. Set up at parks, food pantries, church parking lots. There's a lot of folks who don't have insurance. I've seen them. And they're not going to walk into a hospital even if their arm falls off." "You're not a doctor." "Neither are you anymore apparently," she raised an eyebrow. "I mean," he said quickly, "not officially, but that's never stopped you." She looked down at the heap in the truck bed. "We'd need permission. Some, not everywhere. Some places let you do pop-ups. Volunteers don't need licensure as long as you're not prescribing, just basic care. She chewed on the idea. It was absurd, ill-advised, unregulated. It was also the first thing in months that made her heart kick in her chest like it wanted to believe again. I can draw up a protocol, intake forms, guidelines. I'll do the driving, you do the healing. They worked until midnight. By morning, the Dodge had been repurposed. The back seat held a folding cot. The bed carried plastic bins stacked with bandages and water bottles. Danny spray painted a wooden sign, "Help on Wheels." Their first stop was a lot behind a community church where a soup kitchen operated 3 times a week. The volunteers greeted them with curiosity. Kiara explained what they offered. Basic first aid, blood pressure checks, wound cleaning, health education. Nothing more, nothing less. By noon, a line had formed. An older man with cracked heels and a bad limp. A woman who hadn't seen a doctor since her last pregnancy. A teenage boy with a cough and a swollen wrist. Kiara worked steadily, gently. She asked their names, not their stories. Tom handed out granola bars and kept the coffee hot. Danny kept a list of supplies they needed. It wasn't a hospital. It wasn't even a clinic, but it was something. Each day, they found a new spot, a farmer's market, a food bank, a low-income apartment complex. Each day the line grew. One night, after packing up, Kiara sat on the back bumper wiping her hands with a rag. Her shoulders slumped, her eyes heavy. "I forgot what this felt like," she murmured. "What? To matter?" Tom handed her a bottle of water. "You never stopped." She didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. The next day, someone spray painted a slur on the truck's driver's side door. Tom scrubbed it off himself, jaw clenched, refusing to let her see the rage in his eyes. Danny painted over it with a fresh coat of green and added a decal, a small white cross inside a circle, plain but visible. That night, they sat in Tom's kitchen eating takeout off paper plates. Kiara's phone buzzed with a message from a nurse she once trained. "Heard about what you're doing. We need more of this." She showed it to Tom. "I think he said you're starting a fire." Fires burn things down. They also keep people warm. They didn't speak again for a while. Just sat there listening to the quiet. It was still early. They had a long road ahead. But for the first time in a long time, Kiara didn't feel like she was waiting for someone to open a door. And this time no one could shut it. By the second month of their mobile clinic operation, the Dodge had taken on the appearance of something much older than its years. The paint, though freshly coated, bore fine scratches from folding tables, scuffed coolers, and crates of medical supplies that were loaded and unloaded daily. The suspension creaked with fatigue. Inside, the cab smelled of hand sanitizer, motor oil, and the faintest trace of lemon balm from the disinfectant wipes Kiara insisted on using. It was no longer just a vehicle. It was a moving lifeline. They had fallen into a pattern. Every Sunday night, Kiara spread out a city map on Tom's workbench. They'd mark areas underserved by clinics, neighborhoods tucked behind overpasses, trailer parks at the edge of industrial zones, churchyards where soup kitchens operated in silence. Monday through Friday, they rotated stops, creating a schedule both predictable and spontaneous. Saturdays, they stocked up, logged visits, repaired anything broken, and caught their breath. Sometimes Tom had underestimated the response. He thought people would trickle in, hesitant, but the need was immediate and overwhelming. At the east end of town, where the nearest hospital was a 45-minute bus ride away, they found a line forming before they even parked. A teenage mother arrived holding her toddler in one arm and a bottle of Pedialyte in the other. An old man wheezed through a plastic bag holding expired inhalers. A woman in a restaurant apron came during her lunch break, fingers swollen from arthritis, afraid to miss work and lose her shifts. Kiara treated them all. She never asked why they hadn't seen a doctor. She knew insurance that didn't cover enough, clinics that overbooked and underdelivered, systems built like mazes where every doorway required proof of value before compassion was offered. Her hands moved with calm certainty, her voice even, her eyes always at their level. She remembered names. She jotted down symptoms and patterns in a notebook she kept tucked inside a zippered pouch. At night, she transcribed those notes into a spreadsheet Tom helped her build. No identifying information, just symptoms, conditions, and trends. She wasn't just healing. She was tracking the invisible outline of a crisis the city refused to see. Tom drove and fixed and watched. He became a jack of all operations, setting up shade tents, fixing broken folding chairs, distributing hot coffee or cold water dependent on the day. He handled the conversations Kiara couldn't, stern men who mistrusted strangers, women who flinched at questions, teenagers with clenched jaws and wandering eyes. He stood beside them without judgment, his presence quiet but solid. Sometimes Danny came too. He sat in a folding chair by the supply table, chatting with patients, organizing bandages by color and size, offering peppermints and mints from a Ziploc bag he insisted were medically necessary. His charm softened tension even among those who arrived guarded. It was Danny who noticed her one Wednesday afternoon, the woman in a tattered green raincoat who sat across the street watching. She came 3 days in a row, always at a distance. On the 4th day, she crossed. Kiara was packing up when the woman approached. She moved slowly, one hand clutched tightly around a grocery bag, the other pressed against her lower stomach. "You don't ask for ID," she said, voice low. Kiara shook her head. "Just your name if you want to give it." "Maria." "What's hurting, Maria?" The woman lifted her shirt slightly, revealing a jagged scar running across her belly. Infection was visible. Redness, swelling, the telltale heat under the skin. Had a C-section. Clinic said they couldn't see me again without insurance. I clean houses. I can't pay. Kiara nodded. She opened a clean pad, slipped on gloves, and started cleaning the area. Her hands moved carefully, avoiding pain where she could. Maria winced, but didn't flinch away. "Someone should have seen this days ago," Kiara said quietly. "No one would." Tom stood nearby, watching. He saw the way Kiara's jaw clenched, the way her shoulders stiffened. Later, when they returned home, she said nothing for a long time. Just sat at the kitchen table staring at her notepad. "I treated a woman with post-op sepsis in the back of a truck," she finally whispered. "What are we doing?" "Saving people," Tom said, one at a time. "It's not enough." "Maybe not, but it's more than nothing." That weekend, Kiara didn't rest. She reached out to old contacts, nurses, social workers, a midwife she trained with back in Boston. She asked if they could spare time, supplies, knowledge. A few responded cautiously. One arrived in person the next week, parking beside the Dodge in a battered Subaru with Massachusetts plates and a box of prenatal vitamins. "You really meant it," she said, watching Kiara set up. "Every word." From there, the network grew. A retired EMT came out of his RV with a duffel of expired but usable splints. A church group donated hygiene kits. A grocery store manager gave them a discount on bottled water. A high school student on spring break brought printed flyers and a tablet with translation software. Kiara adapted the intake forms to include Spanish, Vietnamese, and Russian. Tom bought an old bulletin board and nailed it to the side of the truck. "Ask us anything," it said. Not everyone approved. Some residents called the police, claimed they were blocking sidewalks, creating unsanitary conditions, practicing medicine without licenses. Officers came but left quickly when they found nothing more than a few bandaged knees and blood pressure checks. Others watched with silent disapproval. In wealthier neighborhoods, Kiara saw curtains twitch, saw people cross the street, saw the same old fear wearing new clothes. She ignored them because the faces on the other side, the grateful, the desperate, the relieved were what mattered. One afternoon, a boy no older than 8, approached with a limp and a black eye. He didn't speak, just handed her a scrap of paper with the word fall written in shaky handwriting. Kiara sat him down, cleaned the scrapes on his knees, checked for fractures, gave him an ice pack and a chocolate bar from Danny's stash. "Will you come back?" she asked gently. He nodded, stuffed the chocolate into his coat pocket, and walked away. She never saw him again, but she left a note for him on the bulletin board the next week, just in case. As spring deepened, flowers bloomed in abandoned lots, grass pushed through cracks in concrete, and the line at the mobile clinic never got shorter. Kiara's face became known at corner stores, under freeway overpasses, at community centers. People began calling her Doc, despite her insistence. She stopped correcting them. Tom built a small wooden cabinet with compartments for the most used supplies. He added handles so it could be carried into buildings when needed. Danny named it the medicine chest and painted a white heart on the lid. One evening after packing up, Kiara sat beside Tom in the bed of the truck. The sun was setting behind the trees, casting a golden haze over the park. "You know what scares me," she said. "Everything," he offered. She smiled faintly. "That this will stop. That someone will shut it down. That it'll be taken away." He looked at her for a long moment. "Then we'll build it again," he said. "Somewhere else, however many times it takes." The wind shifted, lifting her hair gently. She looked away, blinking hard. "And if I fall apart? I'll hold you together." It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't romantic. It was a promise. The kind people like Tom only made when they meant to keep it. By the end of May, the city had taken notice. A small column appeared in the local newspaper. Grassroots medical effort helping hundreds. No names, just quotes from patients. A photo of the Dodge. Kiara's back turned, hand on a woman's shoulder. When she saw it, she stared at it for a long time. Tom came up behind her holding a mug of coffee. "You hate it?" "No," she said quietly. I forgot what this felt like." "What?" "To be seen for doing the right thing instead of punished for it." He didn't answer. He just sat beside her and together they watched the sunset behind the roof of the garage where their map of stops was pinned with push pins and hope. The work wasn't over. But they had a name now, and that meant the world was watching, even if only a little. The morning started like any other with Kiara wiping down surfaces in the back of the Dodge and Tom hauling folding chairs from the shed behind his garage. The air was thick with the smell of dew and exhaust, the kind of spring morning Portland was known for, bright, but never truly warm. Birds chirped overhead, and somewhere nearby a dog barked in excited protest to the mailman's arrival. Danny sat on the porch with a mug of orange juice, watching them like a self-appointed foreman. He wore a hoodie that read, "I supervise." A gift from Kiara that he wore religiously every Saturday. Tom was midway through lifting a crate of medical supplies into the truck when he paused, hand resting on the tailgate. Kiara looked up, sensing the stillness in his posture. "What?" she asked. He didn't answer right away, just stared into the open bed of the truck, eyes narrowed. "I've been thinking," he finally said. She arched an eyebrow. "Always dangerous." He gave her a sideways glance, the corner of his mouth twitching. "What if we built something permanent?" Kiara straightened. "Like a clinic." "Not a full-scale one, not yet, but a fixed place, a structure, something more than 4 tires and hope." She considered the idea. It wasn't the first time the thought had drifted into her mind during quiet moments, but she had always pushed it aside. There was safety in being mobile. Less red tape, fewer inspections, no leases or overhead to trap them. But permanence had power, too. A place people could return to. A place where resources didn't need to be packed up every night. "I'm not against it," she said cautiously. "But how and where and with what?" "I've got materials, a section of land behind the shop. Enough space for a small structure. I can handle most of the construction. Danny can help coordinate volunteers. I know a few old crew guys who'd lend a hand." She folded her arms. "And money? I've got savings." Kiara opened her mouth to protest, but Tom raised a hand. "Let me finish. I've also been thinking about asking for help. Grant money, donations, if we have something started, foundation laid, a roof, maybe it's easier to show people the vision." She hesitated. She wasn't used to letting other people build things for her, but she knew Tom well enough by now to understand this wasn't charity. It was conviction. "All right," she said. "Let's do it, but on one condition." "Name it." We don't stop the mobile clinic. Not even one day. Tom nodded without hesitation. Never planned to. Over the next week, their world took on a dual rhythm. Mornings and afternoons spent on the road treating patients and evenings back at Tom's lot, marking out foundations and unloading lumber. Volunteers trickled in. Construction workers from Tom's old jobs. Neighbors who had heard about what they were doing, a high school shop teacher who offered tools and weekend labor. Kiara's old colleagues began sending supplies, foldable exam tables, an industrial sink, blood pressure monitors still sealed in their packaging. By the second weekend, a frame had been raised. That Saturday, as they were securing the last beam before sundown, a car pulled into the driveway. It was an unfamiliar model, sleek and low to the ground. The engine cut off and from it stepped a man in a suit too expensive for the neighborhood. Kiara stiffened before she even saw his face. The man walked with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. His eyes scanned the yard, the truck, the volunteers. He stopped a few feet from Kiara and smiled a practiced smile. "Kiara James," he said. "I've been looking for you." Tom moved instinctively, placing himself a half step closer to her. "Dr. Whitaker," Kiara said, her voice cool. "You remember," he said, as if she should have greeted him with gratitude. "I remember you chaired the review board that recommended my termination." Whitaker's smile tightened. "I came to apologize." That surprised her. He didn't look like a man prone to regret. She didn't speak, so he continued. The board was pressured. Politics, budget. I disagreed with how it was handled, but I didn't fight it hard enough. I've been following your work. The mobile clinic, the data you've been quietly collecting. The city council's taken notice. Kiara said nothing. Tom remained a silent presence beside her. You've got real traction here, Whitaker said. Public support. If you were willing to bring this under the hospital's umbrella, we could provide infrastructure, protection, funding, and control. Kiara said flatly. Structure? He corrected. We're not the enemy, Kiara. Let us help you scale this. Make it something bigger. She crossed her arms. The last time I let someone help me scale my work, they buried it. Whitaker didn't flinch. Just think about it. You've done incredible things, but this can't last forever out of a truck. When he left, neither Kiara nor Tom spoke for several minutes. The hammer in Tom's hand thudded once against a post before he set it down. You okay? Kiara nodded, then shook her head. I don't know. She spent the next 3 days thinking about it, weighing the offer, imagining what it would mean to have stability, salaries, supplies, a platform. But every time she pictured it, she saw a conference room filled with people like Whitaker, explaining how her vision needed to be adjusted to meet quarterly targets. She decided on the fourth night, not by logic, but by instinct. The next morning, she drafted a letter and sent it to a handful of press contacts, a simple statement about her decision to remain independent, to build something rooted in community rather than bureaucracy. It didn't go viral, but it rippled. 2 local council members visited their build site the next week. A journalist from an online health publication came to interview her. A grant arrived from a grassroots nonprofit. And one morning, Kiara opened her inbox to find a message from a mother she'd treated weeks ago. You were the first person who looked at me like I mattered. Thank you. She printed it and pinned it to the inside wall of the still unfinished clinic. The next few weeks were filled with milestones. The roof went up, plumbing installed, insulation packed. Tom worked himself ragged, but with a purpose Kiara hadn't seen in him before. Danny took over managing volunteers, creating a system so precise it rivaled hospital logistics. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, everything stalled. Tom's truck sputtered to a stop outside the children's center where they were scheduled to set up. Smoke hissed from beneath the hood. Tom cursed and popped the latch. Kiara stepped out and immediately noticed the problem wasn't mechanical. It was emotional. His hands were shaking. What happened? He didn't answer. She reached for his arm and he finally looked at her. There's something you need to see. He reached beneath the seat and pulled out a crumpled sheet of paper. It was a drawing, one of Danny's. 3 figures holding hands in front of a building labeled clinic. One of the figures had curly hair. One wore overalls. The third had a stethoscope. Emma drew this, Tom whispered. She gave it to Danny last week. Kiara held the drawing gently, feeling the weight of it in her chest. She sees this as her family, he said. She sees you as part of it. Kiara looked at him, her throat tight. And you? He swallowed. I'm just scared of what it means of losing it. She folded the paper, tucked it into her bag. You don't lose people by trusting them. You lose them by pushing them away. He nodded almost imperceptibly. They didn't say the words. Not yet. But that night, when they finished their route and parked back at the house, Kiara didn't leave right away. She stayed, cooked dinner, laughed at Danny's bad jokes, fell asleep on the couch with a blanket draped over her legs, and Tom sitting silently beside her, as if daring the quiet to move them. In the morning, they returned to work together. No contracts, no boards, just a drawing in a bag and a clinic half finished and a truth growing slowly like something finally given room to breathe. The morning light that filtered through the clouds carried a softness that didn't quite match the energy stirring inside the small house on the edge of Portland's industrial corridor. The workbench was cluttered again, not with half-finished tables or blueprints for furniture, but with sorted vials, bandage boxes, rolls of tape, and hand-labeled containers of topical ointments. Tom moved among them in a quiet rhythm, checking the list Danny had drawn up and crossing off supplies with a carpenter's pencil. In the living room, Kiara crouched next to a cardboard box filled with blankets and wipes, counting aloud in a tone that betrayed more focus than nerves. She hadn't slept much the night before, but there was no heaviness in her steps. There was motion, direction, a hum of possibility around her that seemed to seep into the walls. It had been 6 months since the first time they parked the Dodge beside that abandoned corner lot. Since Kiara treated a stranger under a pop-up tent, and Tom handed out water with calloused hands. What started as a way to hold space for those left behind had become something more than either of them expected. The structure behind the workshop now stood completed, a modest single-story building with reclaimed siding and a red-painted door. The windows had no bars, only wide panes that let in light, and inside were rooms outfitted with second-hand medical equipment, neatly organized drawers and exam tables Danny had helped sand and paint. There was a row of hooks for coats, a wall of pamphlets in 4 languages, and a mural that bloomed across the waiting room's far wall, painted by local teens in exchange for service hours and sandwiches. This was their clinic, their foundation. It wasn't sleek or large, but it was real. The grand opening, if it could be called that, was scheduled for the afternoon. Nothing extravagant, just an invitation extended to everyone who had walked through their makeshift mobile unit, left messages of support or donated time and materials. There would be coffee, donated pastries, and 3 folding chairs for speeches no one really wanted to give. Tom had attempted to avoid the spotlight entirely until Danny overruled him and printed flyers with "Meet the Builders" in bold lettering. Kiara had rolled her eyes at the phrasing, but she hadn't fought it. That morning, Emma arrived with her backpack and a brown paper bag of cookies she'd made herself. She hugged Kiara without hesitation, then bounced into the clinic like she owned the place. In some ways she did. It was her drawing after all that sat framed near the front desk, a crayon rendering of the building with 3 smiling figures outside. Underneath in crooked handwriting, it said, "My family's clinic." Kiara looked at it for a long time while the others made final preparations. The colors were a little faded now, the paper slightly wrinkled, but the heart of it remained. She didn't notice Tom step beside her until she heard his voice. She said it came to her in a dream. The building, she saw it before we even poured the foundation. Kiara smiled faintly. She saw it before I believed it was possible. Tom didn't speak again for a moment. When he did, his voice was quieter. "Thank you for not leaving." She turned to face him fully. "Thank you for giving me something worth staying for." Their eyes met, and for once there was nothing unspoken left between them. No fear, no resistance, just understanding, gratitude, and the beginnings of something deeper. The event began slowly. A few early arrivals: an elderly couple from the soup kitchen route, a mother with a toddler who clung to her leg, a man who had once cursed Kiara out of habit but now brought her fresh eggs from his chickens every week, filtered through the door. Tom greeted each guest with his quiet handshake. Kiara moved among them with calm familiarity, checking if anyone needed water, smiling at children, answering questions about schedules and services. Danny manned the refreshments with a pride that made Emma laugh and whisper, "He thinks this is a 5-star hotel." As the crowd grew, so did the noise. Laughter mixed with stories. People wandered through the rooms, marveling at the simplicity, the efficiency, the warmth. More than one person touched the hand-painted mural like it might rub off on them. There was something magnetic about the place, something that reminded people of what care was supposed to feel like. Midway through the afternoon, Kiara stepped outside for air. The breeze was gentle, the sun finally making a proper appearance. She stood at the edge of the garden plot they'd started in the back, raised beds filled with herbs and hearty vegetables. It wasn't much yet, but it would be just like everything else they'd built. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her until she felt the touch at her elbow. "Tom, they're all inside waiting for your big words," he said with a smirk. She laughed softly. "I'm not giving a speech. You don't have to. Just talk. You already gave them the rest." They stood there for a moment longer before walking back in. Kiara took her place near the mural. Tom at her side. Danny and Emma watching from the back with matching grins. She didn't use a microphone. Didn't prepare anything. Just spoke. "When we started this, we didn't have a plan. We didn't have money. We barely had trust. But we had each other. And we had a belief that everyone deserves care. Not just treatment, but attention, kindness, a place to be seen. This clinic isn't a gift from one person. It's a promise from a community. We're going to keep showing up, and we hope you do, too." The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was genuine. Afterward, people lingered. The sun began to sink. Volunteers stacked chairs and collected paper cups. Emma curled up on the exam table in the corner room, fast asleep with her backpack as a pillow. Danny dozed in his wheelchair under the mural. Tom and Kiara stood in the doorway side by side, watching the last few guests leave. She felt his hand brush against hers. She didn't move away. Later, back at the house, Tom brought out a small wooden box wrapped in simple twine. He handed it to her without a word. She opened it to find a pendant. An old wedding ring of his, repurposed, shaped into a circle and set on a leather cord. "I don't want to erase the past," he said quietly. "But I'd like to build something new." Kiara closed the box slowly. "I'd like that, too." In the months that followed, the clinic flourished. The mobile unit continued its rounds, now staffed on some days by volunteers and student nurses. Kiara split her time between the field and the building, never forgetting her roots in motion. Tom expanded the workshop, carving space for furniture and medicine to coexist. Danny organized monthly health fairs. Emma painted a new mural in the front hallway. This one depicting a city filled with trees and people and tiny clinics dotting every corner. When the Boston hospital sent another letter, an offer to bring Kiara back with a title, a salary, and an apology, she opened it with Tom beside her. Read it once, then folded it carefully and slid it into a drawer. "My heart's here," she said simply, and he nodded. A year to the day from when he first saw her standing in the rain, they stood together in front of the clinic under a light drizzle. The Dodge was parked nearby, still functional, still faithful. Children ran in the garden behind them. Someone had written a message in sidewalk chalk. "Thank you for seeing us." Tom looked down at her and she at him. "This wasn't in the blueprint," he murmured. "Most things worth building aren't," she answered. And when they turned toward the door and stepped inside, the rain faded into something softer, almost like sunlight. Behind them, 3 pairs of boots stood drying on the welcome mat. Different sizes, but equally muddy. A sign above the door read, "Healing happens here." It had taken time. It had taken trust, but they had built a home. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Check out our next videos for more powerful stories, and share this one with someone who needs to see it. Thanks for watching, Real Stories Diary.